Hey, welcome to Totally a Thing. In this episode of my series on how to build an app, we're going to be looking at how does your app work with your business. So let's say it's an app-based startup. This fits into my series here. Episode number 5, we're getting towards the end of it. So all these other ones on, please get into it. Some of the things might not make sense unless you take the time to go back and review that material. For this episode, the app startup has moved into kind of a steady state. I've talked on previous occasions about this model for understanding the relationship between your team and your product. Here we've got our product in the early days on the far left. It's not fleshed out. There's just really a frame. You've got a product vision, but it hasn't been realized yet. And at the same time, your team is only just sort of starting to get into its stride. Moving across, this is kind of where we are right now. We've got some features that we're building. There's quite a lot left to go. There's a few gaps in there. But that team is spooling up and got its act into gear, and it's working pretty well as we progress down the timeline towards that milestone that we're looking forward to in the distance. And that milestone, of course, could be your first release. It could be your product MVP. And by the time you get there, most of your features are ready and that team is pretty well spun up. Now, it's very easy when you're focused on those outcomes, that big milestone, to just see above the line. But what's important is that team building up momentum, and I am going to focus a lot in this session on that functioning of the team. At this stage that we're at, we're getting a lot of the great benefits of our team working. We've got our app builds, as that cycle goes around, you and the team, we're getting fresh new beta test builds that we can try out on our phone. And we've got this virtuous cycle happening between all members of the team, the product owner and the UX designer working hand in glove with the engineering team headed up by the engineering manager or project lead. It's obvious that we're going to get that final release. We're going to ship that out. We're going to have our marketing folks do a big launch where we push that thing out to our customers. But what actually is that app? Like, what are you getting? The important thing to think of is that when you hit that milestone, you're already facing gaps between what you thought you were going to have, what your customers needed, and what actually got shipped. Inevitably, there's compromises, even if you've got the perfect team. So it's important to celebrate those releases, but a successful app-based startup, the leaders of that, the founders of that, have to widen their lens to include more than just the product that's being pushed out the door by the marketing team. You have to think about your capability to keep iterating. You push that out on that big launch day, but what about 2 weeks down the track when you've started to get those reports and you want to make more changes? So that's where that capability to keep delivering kicks in. I've previously talked about this model where we've got our product side folks who are focusing on that journey. Sometimes that journey can engage with some twists and turns. So have a look back on my previous sessions about how app development is not a straight line. Obviously, your engineering team is one of the most expensive development costs. Your run costs are primarily going to engineering. However, it's not the thing, in my experience, that winds up costing a large amount of money. It's actually decisions that have taken you in the wrong direction, and then you need to reverse direction and throw away code. Throwing away of code that's the really expensive thing. So that's why maintaining this capability is so important. But what is that capability? Thinking about it from the point of view of running a traditional business, you can't afford to just have this big hole in the ground that you're tipping a ton of money into without understanding what that actual cost is, what that thing is buying you. Let's try to drill down into that, because if, as is tempting perhaps to some folks, to have a model where, I'm going to hit that milestone And you know what? That's when we don't need the team anymore. The app will be finished. Let's look at what that capability is. What is that actual engine room doing? Okay, it looks a bit like this. So we'll start here with our developer. So we obviously are going to have probably several developers, especially at the peak of our app feature velocity. And these developers quite often are working potentially some remotely, some all in the office with you. Some of your founders might be developers, you yourself might be a developer, but you're working collaboratively to create changes to your code base. Obviously, you start off with that empty frame. Then you've got some features and you're laying these on top of each other. So rather than thinking of, some feature as a discrete thing that's bolted on, in general, we think of a feature as a change that's made to our code base. So what then happens with that feature is it's not going to stay on the developer's laptop. I've previously talked about how we build an app package, and that app package is the thing that's going to go up to the Apple App Store or to the Google Play Store so that your customers can download it. The thing about building your app, once you get that flywheel happening, your team running in that regular mode of getting app releases out regularly, that can only happen if you've got some way for folks to collaborate together and then build up that cadence. We have these fortnightly releases. So that coincides with your sprint cycle. You do a release towards the end of the sprint, and this will typically happen via what we call continuous integration. Now that stuff is all happening in the cloud. So you see that red line that I've drawn across the diagram at the top there. GitHub is a platform as a service. It's a cloud service. You can think about it a little bit like, say, Microsoft 365, like your mail server. It's a place in the cloud where your code is going to get pushed up to. You can see here that when we hit that day, like let's say it's a Thursday evening at the end of our release cycle, it's going to trigger that operation. GitHub is then going to pull the code out of the repository. Our engineers have pushed out those sequences of changes. You can see them there represented by those purple dots. And their colleagues' changes represented by the red dots, they're all merged in together. And all of that code is then pulled out through that continuous integration, that scripted operation, instigated by that release trigger. And this all happens automatically. Your engineering team will be tweaking these scripts, building this stuff out, typically guided by your engineering manager, your tech lead, or your project lead. And they'll be working to make sure that that continuous integration system is highly responsive to the needs of the team and to the project. And once that release trigger processes, it might take some time in the cloud. There might be some automatic verification steps. It's going to sign those app packages for you automatically, insert any security keys that need to be securely placed into those app packages. It's going to take any configurations that need to be applied, and maybe even translations. And it's going to push all of that package material into the app stores, ready for your customers and your product manager to actually download those new packages and test them out. Now, your customers, they don't typically update the app straight away. So in some cases, customers will just turn off that ability to update an app because they might download the app, but then they don't want their data plan to get used up by all these weekly updates. So it can often happen that people won't have the latest version of your app. So that's why I put that dotted line there. But eventually that app does get downloaded. Now, I have found in the past that teams that are very used to web development, they can fail to understand this situation where you get this long tail of updates where customers take their time to actually pull down those updates. You can have your community manager say, hey, look, new update, please download. You can push out those messages to try to get customers via their email or via notifications or whatever happens. You can't generally force them to, although you will hear talk of forced updates. So that final step, you eventually get that to happen, and then finally your customers have those new features that you built in the palm of their hands. So that's the capability that is represented by the combination of your engineering folks and you've got that app that's going out the door. Now, I have seen teams run and not use source control. I am quite staggered when I see this, but it has occurred a few times. It never happens in professional app development teams. They always use source control of some sort, but occasionally I have worked with clients who have come to me where they've had problems with the app and they've been working with some kind of outsourcing operation, and there's been problems because the team is not putting the changes into some sort of repository. The problem that you expose yourself to when you do that, whatever the mode is, it could be that you've got some Top Gun developer that you've hired locally, or it could be some sort of outsourcing thing. But it usually means there's some sort of schism between the operation of the team and the folks that are actually building the code. And when that happens, you can have this problem where your engineer leaves and, where's the code? What you want is instead, if the developers leave, the code stays. So you want to make sure that you have great contracts drawn up right from the word go. If you're one of your founders is a developer, they must sign over that code so that it's owned by the company, and they will always have their moral rights, but they can't walk out the door and set up shop with that code. So you need to have those contracts in place. And also the mechanics of it, of course, are that repository, which is in the cloud. It's not their local laptop. When they fold up their laptop and walk out the door, they haven't just taken all of your code with them. So let's start thinking now about other parts of a business operation. So obviously an app-based startup is a business. I've talked about the Lean app startup canvas, sort of wraps up that idea of how you're going to have customers, how you're going to have a unique value proposition. It's not just an app, it is an entire business. So how is it going to work with data? This is a really important thing to think about as you design the structure of the operation of your company. That business data is going to start to grow as you get more and more customers coming through the door. You're going to get inventory items potentially with a commerce app. You're going to have accounts. You're going to have loyalty records. You're going to have usernames and potentially passwords. In some cases, you can farm some of this data out to authentication SaaS products, but you're also usually typically going to have some sort of back end for your app. One of the things to resolve with your team early on is to think about the business impacts of whereabouts you're storing that. Now, we saw just earlier that we've got our code that's being written by our developers, that's getting uploaded to that repository. Now, that is obviously one place that we can put our business data. Let's look at the example of, say, some sort of online store that's, taking place inside of an app. You might have a featured item, like it could be books or it could be some sort of package of some sort, but maybe every week there's a featured item, or if you log in, you've got preferences, there's something tailored for you. Now, what if the internet is really slow? I open up my app and I go to look at it, and there's a white screen there because the internet is really, really bad right now, and it's just taking ages to download some images or whatever it happens to be. It's a common mistake that I see developers make, that they design the app so that when there's internet problems of some sort or some other kind of bug, you just get where there's meant to be this big, glossy, beautiful image that's going to help build trust and engagement with your customers. Instead, you've got this bad experience of having this white screen, or maybe if they look really close, it's buried in there somewhere, there's a little cursor spinning. Alternatively, even an error message pops up. And all they were doing was opening up the app. They didn't do anything suddenly where they expected to see, some useful content. They just got this error message. Now, it's okay, in my opinion, to show the item that was last seen by that user, right? Let's say I had a featured item last week. I open up the app. Suddenly the app has completely forgotten about that featured item. And not only is it forgotten, it's now displaying just a white screen with a weight cursor on it. It's really bad. Like, what happened to the featured item I saw last week? Why couldn't you just display that? Now, I have worked with app developers who are absolutely convinced and swear at me and say, well, the data is incorrect. It always has to match what's on the server. But a cell phone is mobile. It's called a mobile phone. Are your customers going to live in apartment buildings with an elevator? Are your customers going to be office workers in high-rise buildings or traveling on trains? The chances are there's going to be dropouts, and every single one of those dropouts is a place where you could potentially be winding up showing nothing when you have the opportunity to show them something, even if it's a few days old. And in my opinion, that is good business, to show them that nice, colourful image that's branded for your company. It's set up to provide that customer trust, that they have something there that's relevant to them. And then, you know what? When they come out of the tunnel, out of the elevator, it can then be updated with the latest value. Now, it's pretty easy to ensure that your customers don't actually carry out some kind of invalid transaction. They could tap that featured item and be taken to a product detail page that then shows them, hey, that item price is now this many dollars, or that feature is now no longer available, or whatever, and a little advisory thing appears at the top with a little banner or something. But whatever the case, it doesn't need to cause any kind of error or any glitch. If I'm a customer and I see that featured thing, it's, that looks interesting, tap, well, there it is, it's featured, I get to see it, but now it's a couple of dollars dearer, or whatever it happens to be. That's fine. We understand that things get updated, and it's not going to cause a problem. And in the large majority of cases, your customer is going to get a much better experience in those conditions. Now, to do that, you can think about your data modeling in your app. There's going to be cases, for example, where certain pieces of the interaction are very, very slow moving. So, for example, a rideshare company, they might have standard, luxury, and people mover options. And those might not change, or change very rarely. So they can be built into the app with static text that ships when the end customer downloads the app onto their phone. But then you can set it up so that if at any time you decide you need to update that information with new strings of text, your marketing people come to you and say, instead of people mover, we're just going to call it van, or whatever it happens to be. You can have that cloud update kick in from your server. So the key to this is for your product owner, your engineers, and your UX designers to put their heads together and come up what is going to be the best experience. Let's think about our customer who is on the go with their phone in their hand, wanting to spend their money with you. They want to give you their money. Are you going to provide them with a good experience so that you can take that money from them by providing them with a trust and good transaction? Hey, I hope you enjoyed this free preview. Jump on over to totallyathing.substack.com to get the rest of this content. New subscribers get a free unlock so you don't have to stop here. Answers to your questions and some great freebies awaiting. I'll see you there.